The meeting room inside the Galactic Concord station was large enough to hold a small ocean liner. 40 species sat in their curved seats, some breathing filtered gas, some floating in liquid tanks, some just sitting quietly like they had done 1,000 times before. It was a normal session. At least, that was what most of them thought. Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Price stood near the back wall. He was the only human in the room, and nobody paid him much attention. That was fine with him. He had a glass of water in one hand and a small communications device in his jacket pocket. He had been watching the session for 2 hours, and now the vote was almost done. Councillor Dren of the Verith Dominion was the one speaking. Dren was tall, with pale gray skin and 4 long fingers on each hand. He spoke with the kind of confidence that came from having power for a very long time. He had been pushing this motion for 3 weeks, and now it was almost law. The motion was simple. It said that Earth was a Tier 1 undefended world. Under galactic law, that meant any member state of the Concord could claim rights over it. Trade routes, resource extraction, maybe more. The exact details would come later. First, the vote. Dren stood at the center of the chamber and spread his hands wide. He said that humanity had been part of galactic society for 60 years. In 60 years, humans had sent out small ships. They had traded small things. They had smiled and shaken hands and signed papers. But in 60 years, not one single human warship had ever been seen. Not one weapon system had ever been registered. Not one military treaty had ever been requested. He said that the conclusion was obvious. Humans were not a military species. They were merchants, maybe scientists, perhaps diplomats. They were not fighters. They had no way to fight. And under galactic law, a world that could not protect itself was a world that needed to be managed by those who could. Aaron listened to all of this without blinking. He had heard it before, in different words, from different mouths. He took a slow sip of water. The vote went through. 33 in favor. 7 against. Earth was now classified as a Tier 1 undefended world. There was polite applause from some corners of the room. Dren gave a small nod and sat down. A few of the other counselors were already checking their own communications, moving on to the next item on the agenda. It was, to them, a routine decision. They had done the same thing to 4 other worlds in the last decade. Aaron set his glass of water on a side table. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small communications device. He typed 11 words into it and pressed send. The message was encrypted. It would travel through a relay back to Earth. The 11 words were, "They voted. Classification passed. Begin protocol cardinal. Stand by for confirmation." He put the device back in his pocket. Nobody in the room had noticed him do any of this. That was also fine with him. Secretary General Dana Ford was in her office on the station's diplomatic floor when the message arrived. She was a small woman with short gray hair and reading glasses that she almost never actually used for reading. She read the message twice, then set her glasses down on the desk and looked out the window at the stars. Her assistant knocked and entered. He asked if she had heard about the vote. She said she had. He asked if she wanted to issue a formal response to the Concord. She thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. She said there was no need to respond just yet. She said to let them enjoy the next 48 hours. Her assistant looked confused but said nothing. He left the room. Dana went back to looking at the stars. What neither Dren nor any of the other 40 species understood was this. For 30 years, Earth had been very busy. Not with diplomacy. Not with trade. With something much quieter and much larger. Deep below the surface of the moon, inside tunnels that had taken 12 years to cut, something enormous was being finished. Inside the hollowed-out rock of the Martian belt, workers had been welding and testing and building without a single transmission leaving the site. In the cold, dark water of Europa, the lights never went off, because the work never stopped. None of this had been visible from outside the solar system. Humans had been very careful about that. The ships they showed the galaxy were real. The trade routes were real. The diplomats were real. But they were not the whole picture. They were the front of the building. Behind the building, hidden from view, was something the galaxy had never been allowed to see. Aaron Price stood at the back of the Concord chamber for another few minutes after the vote. He watched Dren accept congratulations from 3 other counselors. He watched the room slowly empty. Then he straightened his jacket, picked up his glass of water, and walked out. In 48 hours, the galaxy was going to learn something new about the word defenseless. The tunnel was 2 kilometers wide and smelled like hot metal and burned rock. It ran through the inside of the moon like a great hollow bone, lit by long rows of yellow work lights that stretched so far into the distance they looked like a single glowing line. Ensign Kyle Trout had been assigned to this place 8 months ago, and he still had not gotten used to the size of it. He walked beside Chief Engineer Nora Callahan, who moved quickly and with purpose, the way she always did. Nora was not a tall woman, but she had a way of filling a room. She had short dark hair going gray at the sides and hands that were permanently calloused from decades of working near machines. She carried a tablet in the crook of her arm and spoke while she walked, which meant Kyle had to jog a little to keep up. She was explaining the hull plating to him again, because he had asked the wrong question earlier, and she believed the best way to fix a wrong question was to give a very long correct answer. She said the plating was not like anything the Concorde had ever seen. She said the outer layer would scatter every known scan frequency currently in use by galactic technology. She said they had spent 11 years figuring that out, and another 4 years actually making it work on a surface this large. She said it was one of the things she was most proud of in her life. Kyle looked up at the hull of the vessel above them. It filled the tunnel almost completely. Calling it a ship felt wrong, the way calling an ocean a puddle felt wrong. It was not sleek or graceful. It was enormous and flat-sided and dark, built to carry weapons and survive punishment rather than to look impressive. It looked like a city that had decided to become a warship. The name on the side, painted in letters 2 stories tall, read, Iron Meridian. Kyle asked Nora how long it had taken to build her. Nora did not slow down. She said the design phase was 9 years. The actual construction was 14. She said there were 21 others exactly like it, spread across 3 different sites. She said some of those sites had lost people. Accidents in the tunnel, collapses in the Martian rock, pressure failures in the deep water of Europa. She said those people knew what they were building and they built it anyway. Kyle was quiet for a moment. Then he asked why it was all kept so secret. Nora stopped walking. She turned and looked at him in a way that made him feel like he had asked a question that had a very obvious answer. She said, because if the galaxy knew we were building this, they would have stopped us before we finished. She said, 30 years ago, the Concorde had 12 weapons inspection treaties and 4 active patrol fleets. We were not a member of those treaties. We never signed. They never asked us to. They thought we were harmless. She said, we made sure they kept thinking that. Then she started walking again. Admiral Leon Hayes was on the command deck of the Iron Meridian when Protocol Cardinal came through. He read it once, set it down on the console, and looked out through the reinforced viewport at the inside of the tunnel. He had been waiting for this message for 6 years. He had been working toward this moment for 20. Leon was not a dramatic man. He did not shout or raise a fist or give a speech to the empty room. He simply opened the shipwide channel and said, all stations, this is Admiral Hayes. We have received authorization. Begin pre-launch sequence. I will address the fleet at 0600. The response came back in the form of work sounds. Boots on floors. Consoles waking up. Engines beginning their long warm cycle, which would take 18 hours and sound like the moon itself was humming. At 0600, Leon stood on the command deck with the full senior crew assembled behind him and the fleet-wide channel open. He spoke for 4 minutes. He did not use complicated language. He said, the Galactic Concorde voted yesterday to classify Earth as an undefended world. They did this because they looked at what we showed them and decided we had no way to fight. They were studying the decoy. The ships we let them see, the trade routes, the diplomatic vessels, those were all real. But they were not everything. Now they meet the real thing. He said, we are not going out there to start a war. We are going out there to correct a mistake. The mistake is that they thought silence meant weakness. In 48 hours, the galaxy will understand that it did not. He said, open the doors. The lunar surface, 40 meters above the tunnel entrance, looked still and gray and empty to any outside observer. Then, Slowly, it began to move. Sections that had looked like ordinary rock and shadow for 30 years shifted and split and pulled apart, revealing an opening wide enough to swallow a city block. Dust floated upward into the vacuum. The Iron Meridian moved first. It came up out of the moon like something that had been sleeping underground and had finally decided to rise. Behind it came the others. 22 dreadnoughts in total, accompanied by over 300 escort vessels that had been held in secondary tunnels along the inner curve of the rock. Kyle Trout watched from an observation port near the lower deck as the moon fell away below them and the black of open space opened up above. He had seen the ships in the tunnel 100 times. Out here, in the actual dark, with actual stars behind them, they looked different. They looked real. On the edge of the Sol system, alien sensor stations registered something they had no name for. Massive gravitational signatures, moving in formation, heading outward. The readings were flagged automatically and sent to the Concord command network. Nobody knew what they were looking at yet. But they were already afraid. The first report reached the Concord Central Command Station at 3:14 station time. It came from a deep-range sensor post near the outer marker of the Sol system, and the officer who received it read it 3 times before forwarding it upward, because she was not sure the numbers were correct. The numbers were correct. 22 objects of extreme mass. Moving in formation. Traveling at speeds that did not match any registered human vessel class. Estimated hull dimensions on the lead object. 4.3 kilometers in length. Nearly 1 kilometer wide. The sensor post had no classification for it. It simply flagged it as unknown and sent the alert. By 4 o'clock, the Concord command station was fully awake. Counselor Dren had been pulled from his sleep quarters and was standing in the situation room in his robe, looking at a projection of the moving shapes. His chief aide was standing next to him, very still. Dren said the readings were wrong. His aide said the readings had been verified by 2 separate sensor networks. Dren said the readings were still wrong. His aide did not say anything else. Ambassador Petra Cole was already dressed. She had received the alert the same moment the Situation Room did, because Aaron Price had made sure she was on the right communications list. Petra was Earth's new voice for military matters. She was not the kind of diplomat who smiled and softened things. She had short brown hair, a straight mouth, and a habit of saying exactly what she meant without looking sorry about it. She stood in the observation bay of the Concord station and watched the projection screen with her arms crossed. She had known this was coming. She had helped plan it. But even she found her breath going shallow when she saw the formation spread across the display. 22 dreadnoughts. 340 escort vessels. All of them moving like they had somewhere to be. At 6:47, the Iron Meridian dropped out of faster-than-light travel alongside the Concord's Central Command Station. It did not appear far off. It appeared close. Very close. Close enough that the station's external cameras could see the individual hull plates and the dark rectangular shapes of the weapon arrays running along its sides. The station was large by the standards of the Concord. The Iron Meridian made it look like a shipping container next to a skyscraper. The Concord Situation Room went very quiet. Leon Hayes opened a channel to the full assembly. Not just the command station. All 40 member species. He opened it on every frequency simultaneously, so that there was no question of anyone claiming they had not heard. He spoke in standard Galactic Common, which he had learned specifically for this moment. His voice was flat and even. He said, "This is Admiral Leon Hayes of the Earth Defense Fleet. 24 hours ago, the Galactic Concord voted to classify Earth as a Tier 1 undefended world. We are here to clarify that classification. We are not undefended. We have never been undefended. We chose not to show you what we had because we were not sure how you would respond. We are showing you now. We are not here to fire first. We are here to talk." The channel stayed open for 30 seconds after he stopped speaking. Nothing came back. Then Dren's voice came through, tight and high. He said that this was an unauthorized military display. He said it violated Concord protocols on armed entry into neutral space. He said the human fleet needed to withdraw immediately to Earth orbit. Petra Cole opened her own channel. She said, in a voice that was not raised at all, that Earth had never signed the armed entry protocols. She said Earth had also never signed the Armament Disclosure Treaty. She said that Earth had not signed a great many things, because no one had ever asked them to, because no one had ever thought they needed to. She said she was happy to discuss new agreements, but that the conversation would have to start with a withdrawal of the Tier 1 classification. There was a pause. Then the Concord requested a recess. They were given 1 hour. While the recess happened, the Verith Dominion dispatched a patrol fleet. It was a fast fleet, 17 vessels, the kind the Verith used for intimidation in smaller disputes. They came out of faster-than-light travel in a spread formation, the way you did when you wanted to surround something. They stopped immediately when they saw the human formation clearly on their sensors. Their flagship was one of the largest in the Concord. It was outclassed by the Iron Meridian alone by a factor of roughly 3. There were 21 more behind it. The Verith patrol fleet held position at a distance and did not move closer. Their commander sent a short message back to Dren. The message said that direct confrontation was not advisable at this time. Kyle Trout was watching the Verith fleet from the observation port on the lower deck of the Iron Meridian. He could see their running lights in the dark, 17 small points holding very still. He thought about how they must be looking at his ship right now. He thought about how strange it must feel to have been certain of something for 60 years and then find out you had been looking at the wrong thing the whole time. The hour passed slowly. On the Iron Meridian, no one spoke much. They waited. The recess did not last 1 hour. It lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes, which told Petra Cole something useful. It told her they were arguing with each other, not just thinking. She had expected that. It was actually what she was counting on. She used the time to meet with Counselor Sivan of the Larathai Union. The meeting was not scheduled. Sivan had sent a short message to her communications link asking for a private word, and she had agreed immediately, because she knew who the Larathai were and what it meant that they were reaching out now. The Larathai were small. Their home system had 3 inhabited planets and not much else. For 40 years they had been pushed around by the Verith Dominion in quiet ways, through trade restrictions and border disputes and inspection demands that always seemed to go one direction. None of it was ever quite bad enough to bring to the full Concord. It was just bad enough to remind the Larathai of who was stronger. Sivan was a short creature with large eyes and hands that were almost human in shape. He sat across from Petra in a small side room off the main corridor and folded those hands on the table between them. He said he wanted her to know that the Larathai had not voted in favor of the Tier 1 classification. He said they had been one of the 7 votes against. Petra said she knew. She said she had read all 7 votes and understood what they meant. Sivan said, "We have been waiting a long time for a conversation like this one." He said it quietly. He said it the way someone says a thing they have thought about for years but never had the chance to actually say out loud. Petra said she understood. She said Earth was not going anywhere. She said they would have time to talk. In the main chamber, Dren was not doing well. He had spent the recess trying to build an emergency coalition. He needed at least 20 votes to pass an armed response authorization, which was the only legal tool the Concord had for forcing a military withdrawal. He needed 20. He had found 9. The problem was the Veritha's reputation. They had spent years using their position in the Concord to press smaller members. Not hard enough to cause a full rebellion, but enough that when the moment came to stand with them against something new and unknown, many of those smaller members looked at the floor instead. Dren stood at the center of the chamber when the session resumed and tried to hold his argument together. He said this was about the law. He said it was about order. He said no member state had the right to arrive in neutral space with an undisclosed military fleet and issue demands. Petra, speaking from a secondary position at the edge of the chamber, said again that Earth had not violated any law it had agreed to. She said the Concord's legal scholars were welcome to review the membership agreements Earth had signed 60 years ago. She said they would find, on careful reading, that Earth had agreed to trade law and dispute resolution protocols and communication standards. She said they would find no armament clause, no military disclosure requirement, and no neutral space restriction, because those documents had been written for member states that everyone assumed were already armed. One of the Concord's legal interpreters spoke up from the side gallery. He said, very carefully, that Ambassador Cole's reading of the agreements appeared to be technically correct. Dren's jaw tightened. He said the situation on the ground was clear. He said a foreign military was positioned next to the Concord's central station. He said that was a threat. Leon Hayes, still on the channel from the Iron Meridian, said, in the same flat voice as before, that no human weapon system was active. He said all weapons were cold. He said they were simply present, the same way the Verith patrol fleet behind them was also simply present. This caused a brief round of noise in the chamber, because many of the species present had not realized the Verith had dispatched a fleet. Dren shifted his position. He dropped the legal argument and made a direct threat. He said the Verith Dominion would take action against Earth's outer colonies if the human fleet did not withdraw within 6 hours. He said this quietly, which made it worse than if he had said it loudly. The chamber went still. On the Iron Meridian, Leon received the words through the open channel. He did not respond verbally. He turned to his navigation officer and said 4 words, "Redirect 4 to perimeter." 4 of the 22 dreadnoughts peeled slowly away from the main formation. They did not increase speed dramatically. They did not power weapons. They simply changed direction toward the outer edge of the Verith home system, which was 11 light hours away, and began moving. Steadily. Without announcement. Everyone watching the sensor feeds in the chamber saw it happen. Dren saw it happen. He said nothing more about the colonies. The vote to rescind the Tier 1 classification was called 30 minutes later. It passed with 31 votes in favor, 6 against, and 3 abstentions. Earth was formally reclassified as a sovereign military power of the first rank, which was a category that had not been used in the Concord's records for over 200 years. The last species to hold it had used the title for 4 centuries before eventually dissolving into the general membership. Nobody in the chamber laughed. Nobody applauded. There was just a long, heavy silence, the kind that comes when a room full of very old institutions realizes that the world is now different in a way it cannot undo. The Dreadnoughts did not go home right away. Leon had planned for this. He had always known that showing up was only half the work. The other half was making sure it stuck. The fleet held position at the edge of Concord space for 30 days. Not moving toward anything. Not threatening anything. Just there, in the dark, visible on every sensor network in the galaxy. A reminder that the world had changed and was not going to change back. The 4 ships that had redirected toward the Verith outer perimeter stayed for 11 days and then returned to the main formation, unhurried. No contact had been made. Nothing had been said. They had simply been present, the way a closed door is present. You do not have to open it to understand what it means. Back on Earth, the news broke in layers. The first layer was celebration. People gathered in public squares and on rooftops and watched the broadcast feeds showing the Iron Meridian sitting next to the Concord station. There were flags and noise and a great deal of feeling. The second layer came a few days later, and it was harder. Journalists and public voices began asking questions that had obvious answers and uncomfortable ones. They asked how a fleet of 22 warships had been built over 30 years without the public ever being told. They asked who had authorized the initial construction. They asked what else had been decided in secret and in what other areas the government had chosen silence over transparency with its own people. These were fair questions. None of the people asking them were wrong to ask. Dana Ford gave a public address from the main hall in Geneva. She stood at the podium in a gray suit with no flags behind her, which was a deliberate choice. She spoke for 22 minutes. She said, 30 years ago, a decision was made by a small group of people who understood what the galaxy was like. The decision was to build something that could protect Earth without letting anyone know we were building it. She said, if the Concord had known, they would have passed laws to stop us. They had the power and the votes and the legal tools. And we would not have had time to finish. She said, I am not going to stand here and tell you this was comfortable or simple or that I have no doubts about it. I have doubts about it. But I will tell you that I believe we would have ended up as a managed world inside someone else's system if we had done nothing. I believe that with everything I have. She paused. Then she said, I hope we never have to do anything like this again. I mean that. And I hope that the next time we face a large decision, we find a way to face it together. She answered questions for 40 minutes after that. Some of them were angry. She answered the angry ones the same way she answered the others. On the Iron Meridian, Nora Callahan stood at a porthole near the engineering level and looked out at the stars. The ship was quiet at this hour. Most of the crew was on a reduced rotation. The main work was done, and the waiting was the kind that didn't require much of anyone. She thought about a man named Cal Reeves, who had died in a tunnel collapse in the Martian site 11 years ago. He had been one of her structural engineers, a quiet man who brought the same lunch every day and never raised his voice. She thought about the 17 others who had died in various incidents over the course of construction, all in places that officially did not exist. She thought about the fact that they had all known what they were building. They had chosen to be there. That did not make it simple. It just made it something she could carry. She pressed her hand flat against the cold viewport for a moment, then walked back to her work. Kyle Trout found a spot on the upper observation deck near the end of the first week. He went there in the evenings when his shift was done. It was a small curved room with a wide viewport that looked out toward open space. You could see the edges of the formation from there if you looked to the right. One evening, a senior officer named Ben Larkin came in and sat down in the other chair. Ben was older, with the kind of quiet that came from having seen many things. They sat without talking for a while. Then Kyle asked if he thought a war was still coming. Ben thought about it honestly. He said he didn't know. He said the Concord had a lot of members who were not the Verith, and that some of those members were probably rethinking a lot of things right now. He said the galaxy had just learned that humans were not what they appeared to be, and that was the kind of knowledge that changed conversations for a very long time. Kyle asked if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Ben said, probably both. Then he looked out the viewport. Then he said, but it's a different kind of conversation now. That part is good. Leon Hayes recorded a private log on the last night of the 30-day hold. He sat alone in his quarters with the recorder open and said what he thought without organizing it first. He said, they thought silence was weakness. 30 years of quiet and small ships and polite trade agreements, and they looked at all of that and decided we had nothing behind it. He said, but we were patient. We needed time and we took it. We built what we needed to build and we waited for the right moment and we showed up. He said, I hope the galaxy understands the difference between those two things now. Silence is not the same as helplessness. Patience is not the same as surrender. He closed the recorder and sat for a while in the dark. On the 31st day, the Iron Meridian turned and began the long journey home. The fleet fell in behind it, 2,000 kilometers of warships moving through the black in formation, running lights cutting slowly through the dark. Before they cleared the Concord sensor range, a new message arrived on the diplomatic frequency. Then another. Then 5 more. By the time the fleet crossed the outer marker of the Sol system, 7 different species had sent formal requests for diplomatic contact with Earth. Not trade requests. Not inspection notices. Contact requests. The kind you send when you want to sit down and talk to someone as an equal. Petra Cole read through all 7 and made notes. She would have a great deal of work ahead of her. She did not mind. This was, she thought, exactly the kind of work she had gotten into this business to do. Earth answered all 7 messages. It said it would be happy to meet.